Okay, Yamiche, please stay with us. Joining us as well for the conversation, we have CNBC senior analyst and commentator Ron Insana and Yale Law School Paul Tsai China Center senior fellow Samm. Welcome to you both. Ron, you first here. Markets are rebounding. The April jobs report was better than expected, but the president is not backing down from most of his unilateral tariffs, including those on China. What will be the near future impact on the economy, and is a recession still possible?
Yeah, I think we've backed away a little bit from recession risk, only insofar as the underlying economy, pre-tariff anyway, has been doing reasonably well. I mean, the GDP figures that we saw earlier in the week were somewhat misleading, and there's some underlying strength in consumer spending and business investment. The trade numbers, because of the pull forward of imports ahead of the tariffs, kind of messed up the GDP math a little bit and made it look like we were contracting when we were probably still growing. And then the labor market numbers that we got on Friday were reasonably strong. We're seeing some deceleration, though, in the economy. We're hearing it from airline companies. We're hearing it from hospitality companies. We're hearing it from consumer companies. McDonald's, for instance, had its worst same-store sales since the pandemic. And so it does appear that consumers are pulling in their horns. The big question here, Alex, as you rightly point out, is how long will this process last of trying to negotiate a deal, especially with China? If it drags on for months and months and months, we will not see goods from China coming to our shores. We will see empty shelves, and that will raise the risk of recession, layoffs, and other types of contractions that businesses and adjustments that businesses will have to make in order to ride out this storm, however long it lasts.
So, Samm, China agreed to begin trade talks with the U.S., but only if Trump removes his unilateral tariffs. And Trump said he's not lowering those 145% levies unless Beijing gives the U.S. something he considers substantial. Do you see China blinking first? I mean, how far will President Xi go in inflicting pain on the Chinese people in order to win this trade war?
Well, first, Alex, I'd say there's confusion about whether the two sides are even talking. The indication as of Friday is China said they're considering talks. Earlier, Trump said he's waiting for Xi Jinping to call, and now we're talking. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs denied that as fake news. I think Xi and the leadership in Beijing does not want to look weak. They don't want to have a President Zelensky moment in the White House. So right now, we're still in a game of chicken about are talks actually happening.
Which, let me ask you, Yamiche, because this week, the last Chinese cargo ships carrying goods without Trump's crippling tariffs, they arrived in U.S. ports. Chinese imports have steadily plummeted since Trump's tariffs went into effect, and American consumers can soon expect price hikes and potentially empty shelves. So how is the White House responding to these concerns? I mean, when might negotiations with Beijing begin? Are they saying anything about it that we can factually sort of corroborate with China?
Well, Alex, that is the key question. When will these negotiations actually start? It's not clear when that's going to happen. As you said, China's ministry has said that if the U.S. wants to start negotiations, that they need to do away with these unilateral tariffs. And they also said that the U.S. has expressed interest in wanting to start negotiations. They've also, because there's been a lot of statements out of China, they've said at one point that the U.S. needs to stop putting out confusing information and really misleading people into thinking that these negotiations are happening. Of course, President Trump has been saying, well, yeah, there are talks happening. I have talked to President Xi. What's clear is that he hasn't talked to him since these tariffs went into effect and this escalating trade war got started. So it's just not clear when this is going to happen. And U.S. officials, White House officials are essentially saying, especially through the National Security Council, the last statement we got was that there are still conversations happening through normal diplomatic channels. That was the language there, but it's just not clear when these negotiations will actually kick started and when these two leaders, which are really going to be at the heart of whether or not this thing can get worked out, whether or not President Xi and President Trump can really sit down and work this out. We're just not clear when that's going to happen and if it's going to happen at all.
Yeah. And Republicans, Ron, are trying to figure out how to pay for the trillions in tax cuts in President Trump's big, beautiful spending package. The administration says tariffs will pay for the tax cuts and then pay down the national debt. Doing the math, does this add up for you?
No, I mean, not even in the least. I mean, when you look at this, and he also, by the way, the president brought up the notion of eliminating income taxes for people making under $200,000. Then he floated the notion of eliminating the income tax altogether. If you wanted to do that, not that it would be possible, you would have to have 125% tariffs on all goods coming to the United States. You know, we have income taxes a total around $4 trillion, and we have about $3 trillion worth of imports. So in order to make any of those numbers work, you know, you really have to engage in some, you know, fantastical math in order to arrive at some of the conclusions the president has. So, and this is not the way you do it, because when you do impose massive tariffs, you also get a drop off in demand because prices go up and products disappear. And so it doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. And quite frankly, we're not even sure what the president wants out of China. Does he want the trade deficit to go away? That's a near impossibility. We have a $300 billion trade deficit with China. Does he just want to solve the fentanyl problem? Does he want to keep the tariffs in place on a prolonged basis? We don't have answers to any of those questions. And if you go back to 2018, when the U.S. engaged in so-called phase one agreements with China on purchasing more U.S. goods, they didn't make good on their end, and that was really a bust.
So, Sam, the tariff war is the battle with China that we see out in the open. But this week, the CIA released 2 new videos aimed at recruiting Chinese nationals to spy for the agency, part of Director John Ratcliffe's priority to increase intelligence collection on China. How do these videos go about persuading Chinese officials to share state secrets with the U.S.? I mean, the internet in China is locked down. It is censored. So how are officials able to view them?
Elites in China do have access to VPNs. It's kind of a selective firewall. It's quite porous. Are these videos going to be convincing? I mean, we do know that Xi is undertaking a massive purge focused right now on the armed forces. It's part of consolidating power. It's also an indication of his potential insecurity. And I think U.S. intelligence agencies are hoping this is a vulnerability they can exploit. What we're seeing now is the spy versus spy world that we don't usually get a glimpse into behind the very public tariff, trade, and investment battle.
And in a recent article, Sam, you wrote about how U.S. efforts to kneecap China's dominance in the technology market might actually be undermining both American competitiveness and national security. You point to how the U.S.'s 2019 ban of that company, Huawei, which at the time was the world's largest manufacturer of smartphones, spooked the company, sparked it as well, to develop a new operating system that could challenge the global dominance of Android and Apple. What happened then, and what about the threats to the U.S.?
When Huawei lost access to the Android operating system, it was an action-forcing event that the company said, all right, we have to build our own. Harmony OS Next is dubbed pure blood by Chinese citizens because it's entirely homegrown. China has talked about indigenous innovation for years, but sweeping bans on access to U.S. technology has been an action-forcing event that's finally spurred them to do it. Now, Huawei doesn't want to just dominate in China. They want a Harmony OS operating system to go out into the world, dethrone Apple iOS, Android, Windows. And I think what we're seeing here is how sweeping bans can actually shift global markets in ways that affect competition and national security far beyond China or the United States.
Interesting. Ron, let me just ask you real quickly your reaction to the news that Warren Buffett, of course, the longtime CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, is going to be stepping down at the end of the year. It comes not long after his right-hand man, his partner, if you will, there, Charlie Munger, passed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I mean, Warren, you know, who I've known now for over 30 years, since he was in his 60s, is 94 years old. And he has built out a succession plan already. I think it took a few people by surprise that he is fully stepping away at this juncture. But, you know, he's 94. He has built one of the greatest investment vehicles in the history of the United States. And I would imagine that his days, you know, with respect to what he wants to get done and how he wants to go about his life doesn't include running a company on a day-to-day basis. this. And he has, backed away a bit, and he has taken fewer phone calls and things like that in recent months. And so, look, it's, there's nothing you could say about this, but, offer a kind of a laudatory series of exclamations about what he's done, what he's managed to do, his brilliance and that thing. But he's 94 years old, and not too many people, have the luxury of working until they're 94 and staying as crisp and as sharp as he has.
Listen, he'll forever be the Oracle of Omaha, that's for sure. But I want to thank you all three for joining us, and we'll see you again.